back and says, well, where was the disruption? There almost never is disruption. As a matter of fact, the sad truth about anti-discrimination legislation is, people know this and people here who practiced it, it tends to be under-enforced because the people who want to discriminate came sophisticated, and the burden of proof is always on the one who's charging discrimination. So the argument that it's going to be disruptive just doesn't work. The argument that it's already done, it's not true. So, and as to need, you're going to hear from a witness who applied for and was granted a job by the Library of Congress. We're not talking about some benighted institution out in some remote part of the country. The Library of Congress, our intellectual and cultural center. A person was hired, and when that individual told the hiring agent, well, I'm going through a gender change, she lost her job. And she lost her job, and I'm deeply offended by this, because the hiring people said, oh, you know what, you're going to be working on terrorism. Members of Congress won't respect you. Well, I very much resent having that prejudice imputed to me and to you. And I hope that the Library of Congress will come to its senses and rescind this terribly bigoted decision. But let's be clear, you ask if there's a need. If this can happen to a qualified military veteran here in the Library of Congress, of course there's a need in other parts of the country. And let me just close personally. And I understand, let's again be honest, I realized when I first realized I was gay, it made me uncomfortable 50 years ago. It's not something, sexuality and difference, they come together, they get to the core of our human frailty. But we do get used to each other. And in virtually every case where we have confronted a prejudice, it's worked out fine. And we now boast about the lack of it. We're simply saying this is a new category to some people, but everything that applies in every other case applies here. And for people for whom you think, well, gee, it makes you uneasy, well, how do you think it makes the people who are themselves transgender feel? Does anybody think anybody would volunteer to engage, to feel the kind of tension that my colleague so well described, to feel trapped in your wrong body, in the wrong body? And these are people who have courageously tried to deal with that so that they can maximize their ability to live the same lives we all want to live. Why would we deny them protection? I understand, as I said, people got to get used to it. But that's all they're asking. Nobody's asking anybody to have dinner with people that make you uneasy or take them to the movies. Let them work. Let them work. People are asking for the right to have a job and be judged on that job by the way in which they do the job. Why should that be considered disruptive? And the fact that they are this or that or the other, it is no more relevant than it used to be about their race or their gender or their sexual orientation. And as my colleague pointed out, American corporations have benefited from this. No one is being given a license to misbehave. No one is giving a license here to be bizarre, although this institution has a tolerance for the bizarre that maybe other institutions would well emulate. But that's all we're asking. So just to summarize, you've heard from my colleague who we're talking about. Not a huge number of people, but they're people who first of all had a deep anguish and have courageously dealt with that, and they're only asking to be constructive citizens and to be allowed their personal space, but to be judged in their impersonal work, their economic work, solely by their merits. They are not now protected by the law. The argument that it would be disruptive is simply not true. It hasn't been disruptive in major corporations or in those states that have done it. These are people who are grappling with something that many here, let's be honest, are probably grateful that you don't have to grapple with. Can't you help them? That's all we are talking about. We are talking about responding as a compassionate society, knowing that fighting discrimination illegally has worked well for this country, to extend it to a group that may be new, that certainly new, may be disturbing to a few people, but there is no more reason to deny them that than there was to anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate the compliments to the committee, but the way we operate here is we don't measure our duty by the quantity of those who are aggrieved. We measure it by the depth of the grievance that those who have been discriminated against suffer. So we're not concerned about how many people have been discriminated against. We're concerned about the gravity of that discrimination. The way that I would like to proceed is if Do any of our members have questions on a majority side for either of our colleagues? That's very good.
Can I ask him, as the chairman of the full committee, I can ask you two questions? How do you get him to not make opening statements and not ask questions? Anything later?
Ask Mr. Miller. He's good at that. Any on the minority side for our colleagues? I would propose that we have a number of floor votes. We will go cast our votes. We will immediately return and proceed with the next panel, and we will stand in adjournment until then.